As sea levels rise, forests burn and temperatures climb, our towns and cities are becoming a little less habitable. Large-scale migration is something the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26, is hoping to help prevent. But displacement is already happening. Russia's largest region, Yakutia, has one of the world's most extreme climates. Here, the challenges of living with climate change are more immediate than for most. As winter approaches in Yakutia, everything has a sense of urgency. Builders are aiming to finish this house before the first snow arrives. It belongs to Ilya Avakumov, his wife and 3 children. They live in one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth, where winter temperatures can reach minus 60 degrees Celsius. But this summer, it was on fire. Ilya watched as the flames approached his village of Byaskuol.
Тот день 7-го ветер был очень сильный, и пожар перекинулся на, как близко уже деревни, да, уже километр где-то так остался. И вот я с женой приехал сюда, чтобы дом защитить, да, и где-то часа 3-4 вот уже этот микрорайон уже не было.
The Avakumovs lost everything. They only managed to save some important documents. They'd witnessed forest fires in the past, but none quite like this one.
3-4 часа мы приехали сюда. Может быть, дом остался, может, гараж остался, может, баня остался посмотреть. Мы приехали, там вообще ничего не было. Даже столба одного не было.
Since their house was destroyed, Ilya and his family have moved in with his mother. The state paid to replace the houses lost in the fire, but not their contents. Rebuilding his life has consumed Ilya's time, leaving him out of work. His family is struggling to get back to normal.
Бытовой техники нету, вот это надо. Телевизор надо купить, стиральную машину надо купить, диван надо купить. Поэтому я вот очень надеюсь, что еще помогут люди добрые, окажут какую-нибудь помощь.
Forest fires are becoming a regular feature of Siberian summers. This year's were the worst on record. More than 18 million hectares of Russian forest burnt down, most of it here in Yakutia. Many were caused by human activity, including arson and poorly managed controlled burns. An abnormally hot, dry period created the perfect conditions. This year's forest fires wreaked devastation across vast swathes of the region, but most of them didn't come near human settlements. The town of Byaskuol was just unlucky. In Yakutia, it isn't fire that puts people's homes most at risk, but the thawing of the permafrost that they sit on. 95% of Yakutia sits on permafrost, but many houses aren't built with that in mind. When heated, they accelerate the thaw of the ground below. Eventually, the water comes inside.
Мы в кровать в сапогах заходили, сапоги снимали, потом спали, потом вставали опять в сапогах, одевали сапоги и ходили.
Lyubov Reshetnikova and her family lived in this house in Amga until 2013. In spring and autumn, the floor would flood with water. Then the house started to collapse.
Конечно, жалко было. Тут как-то мы заехали сюда, дети маленькие совсем еще были у нас, тут и качели были, и все, и они по дому там катались, все, но потом уже, все-таки уже совсем уже сын старший говорит: мама, сколько можно мучиться?
The Reshetnikov family had to pay for their own replacement home. The only assistance came in the form of a small interest-free loan.
У всех ли такие проблемы?
Alexander Suleimanov is a researcher studying the human impact of climate change. Yakutia's extreme conditions put residents at risk from thawing, flooding and fires. But Alexander has found that locals are very resistant to relocation.
Многие привязаны, большинство подавляющее к своим, к местам своей жизни, где они родились, где они учились, и они не готовы переезжать, они стараются справляться с этими трудностями.
Some who move as part of their way of life are dealing with a different set of challenges. Sofia and Pyotr Kaurgin are nomadic reindeer herders. They live in the region of Chukotka to Yakutia's northeast. In recent years, their work has become more unpredictable. A changing landscape has brought new insects, different plants, and rougher terrain.
Конечно, изменения очень большие. И даже на глазах все видно. Во-первых, земля стала очень совсем другое. Вот. Кочки стали очень большие, очень громадные такие кочки. Раньше они маленькие были, сейчас большие. Олени, падбище изменились, очень тоже изменилось олени падбище. Вот. Раньше мы до моря кочевали, а сейчас за следом оленем шли. А сейчас олень туда уже не идет.
Altered weather patterns impact when nomads can travel over rivers, which need to be frozen. They also delay the reindeer mating and birthing seasons. The Kaurgins say all of this is because of a failure to respect nature.
Когда землю копаешь уже, оно же выходит, это же рана земли, например. Если человеку нож вонзить, он же умрет. Так же и землей. В северных районах, наших районах, очень много полезных ископаемых, но не надо слишком так увлекаться. Все надо же, наверное, по мере сохранять экологию или как-то.
Indigenous groups are disproportionately affected by climate change. For them, unpredictable weather patterns are more than an inconvenience.
Система нарушилась, сама природная, климатическая. То есть невозможно предсказать, что будет завтра и так далее. Как старики говорят, природа нас обманывать стала. Для большинства это больше, как сказать, спортивный интерес. Для нас, коренных народов, та же самая рыбалка и так далее, это основа выживания. Это наша основа питания, жизни и так далее. И если мы не сумеем поймать рыбу для того, чтобы себя прокормить, это означает, что мы не сможем нормально жить. Упадет наше качество жизни.
Back in Biaskual, steps are being taken to protect new homes from climate threats. A fire break separating the forest from the village is being expanded. The newly built houses are being fireproofed. And unlike their now destroyed predecessors, they're being built on deep pillars to prevent the permafrost below from thawing. Yakuts say when a summer is as hot as this year's was, an even colder winter is approaching. Extreme temperatures may be part of life here, but as the climate continues to change, that life is becoming increasingly precarious.
Climate change is having profound and devastating effects across the globe, and nowhere is this more apparent than in India. From heat waves and drought to deadly floods and cyclones, climate-induced disasters only seem to be increasing in intensity and frequency. As a result, millions of Indians, particularly in rural communities, are being displaced, forced to move and rebuild their lives elsewhere in the country. Returning home brings back harrowing memories for the Kandalka family. Their entire village of Talier was wiped out by a landslide during torrential monsoon rain one day in July this year. It flattened the dozens of houses that once stood here in the area of Mahad in the state of Maharashtra, Western India. The Kandalka family tell me they managed to escape just in time. But many of their neighbours were not so fortunate. Some 80 people were killed in the disaster, and the more than 70 survivors lost not just a home, but a sense of community.
आमची माणसं खूपच चांगली होती तिथली. कोंडलकर वाडीमधली सगळी लोक प्रेमळ होती आणि त्यांची साथ आम्हाला हवी होती असं वाटतंय. आता म्हणजे सगळं कसं लोकही नाही कोणही नाही तर म्हणजे सगळं एकदम विचित्रसारखं वाटतंय. जरा मन बेचैन होतं असं झाल्यासारखं वाटतंय.
The family's been staying with friends in a nearby village. and they'll move to a temporary container here provided by local authorities, who have also promised to build new homes for the displaced residents at a location not too far away. But their future remains uncertain. In Talye, Mr. Kandolkar had the means to support his family. But with those resources gone, he now says he may have to move to the city of Pune, 130 kilometers away, to find work.
इधर 40 बाई का 40 का घर होता था बड़ा उधर, और खेती भी 5-6 ज़्यादा एकड़ होता था, बोला तो खेती करने का, वो भी नज़ीक का करता था। अभी वो सब खेती गया ना, इसमें लगाया था।
Climate scientists say landslides and other weather-linked disasters like flooding, cyclones, heat waves and drought are on the rise in India. And they say climate change is behind this as carbon emissions impact weather patterns. Mahad is located about 160 kilometers south of Mumbai. It comprises more than 180 villages, all largely dependent on farming. But the entire area was heavily flooded, along with several other parts of Maharashtra, during July's heavy rainfall. The flooding that took place here in Mahad this year was the worst in living memory. Residents say that some places were submerged under more than 15 feet of water as the river Savitri overflowed because of torrential rain. More than 2/3 of India's population live in rural areas. Many of these people work in agriculture and fishing, and they are at the mercy of weather conditions. A study by ActionAid and Climate Action Network South Asia projects that as many as 45 million people will be forced to migrate from their homes in India by 2050 due to climate disasters.
We have to also remember that these come on pre-existing conditions of precariousness, where already large majorities of our people are in precarious conditions, landless people in agricultural sector, informal workers without any social protection, without any assurance of a decent wage.
In Mahad, farmer Ganpat Kopkar tells me that changes in weather conditions in recent years are making farming unsustainable for him. His crops were destroyed in this year's floods, leading to thousands of dollars worth of losses. Mr. Kopkar has been farming since he was a child, and his family have farmed here for generations. But this tradition is likely to die out with him.
पहाड़ घड़ी आता है तो इंटरेस्ट ही गया है खेती का करने का। अभी खेती हमारे से होता भी नहीं है, इसके लिए हम अभी क्या करेगा ये सोच के बच्चे लोग को बाहर गांव भेज दिया, बाहर गांव बम्बई में।
He now plans to sell his land, although given the history of flooding in the area, he's not sure if he can. If he somehow manages to get a good price for it, he and his wife say they'll uproot themselves and move to Mumbai to join their grown-up kids. The city of Mumbai is heavily overpopulated, with more than 12 million people packed into an area of 600 square kilometres. That's putting enormous pressure on its already insufficient infrastructure, and further migration into urban areas will only exacerbate overcrowding in slums like this one. It's called Dharavi, India's largest slum and home to some 1 million people. Among them is Ram Prajapati. He was a farmer from the northern state of Uttar Pradesh. Drought in his area forced him to move to Mumbai 4 years ago, where he used to pick up odd jobs in construction. But with construction work drying up during the COVID-19 pandemic, he's now selling snacks on the street to make a few dollars a day to get by. Still, he says he's not inclined to go back to his old life.
और बारिश नहीं आएगी तो धान सूख जाता है, वो फूकता नहीं है, उसमें से चावल नहीं निकलेगा। और गेहूं की खेती में बराबर पानी लगता है, उसमें भी पानी नहीं है, बारिश नहीं हुआ तो फिर पानी कहाँ से आएगा, और आलू और गन्ना की खेती कहाँ से उपजेगी, नहीं हो पाती है।
Just north of the city, these fishermen are also struggling with the effects of climate change. Rising seas, cyclones and pollution are all reducing their catch.
नुकसान तो बहुत हो गया हम लोगों का, इतना कि पूछो मत, क्योंकि अगले साल में जो साइक्लोन आया था उसमें हमारे इधर की एक बोट फंसी थी, उसका देव संदेश नाम है बोट का। वो बोट कम से कम लगभग कितना 5-6 दिन तक उधर ही थी बाहर, क्योंकि जाने का आने का कोई रास्ता नहीं था।
Like many fishermen in India, Mr. Govind doesn't want his 3 children to follow him into this line of work. He's investing everything he can spare into their education so they can move into the city to work when they grow up. Humanitarian experts say that greater efforts need to be made across all sectors to address some of the deeper problems of inequality and safeguard livelihoods in rural areas through cooperatives, for example, to mitigate the impact of climate-induced disasters, along with steps to boost jobs in urban areas and provide social housing to support migrants.
You know, if we don't do this, we see immense risks to those already vulnerable. This, sadly, is affecting the people who are least responsible for climate change.
And climate scientists warn a greater push worldwide is needed to bring down carbon emissions to tackle global warming. But the fear is that even with the best efforts, India will see more disasters like the one that took place here in Taliay, leaving people without homes or forcing them to move elsewhere to escape the impact of climate change. And that means millions more like the Kandalka family could be left to pick up the pieces.
With its unique geology and topography, Nepal is often listed among the countries most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Millions of Nepalese are seen to be at risk from threats such as changing weather patterns, food insecurity, and infrastructure damage. Nepal has one of the highest fatalities from landslides in the world. Just last year, I traveled to disaster-prone Sindhupalchok, which was reeling from a series of landslides and floods. On the evening of June 15th, the start of this year's monsoon season, the areas of Helambu and Melamchi were wiped out by a flash flood. Melamchi resident Ramkaji Shrestha says more than a dozen houses were swept away and many others buried in an instant.
एक्कासी माथिबाट यो भोताङ साइड भन्ने ठाउँबाट ठुलो बाढी आउँदैछ त्यहाँ बस्न लायक छैन भनेर चाहिँ त्यहाँबाट फोन आयो ल त्यहाँ भनेको भन्दा एकछिनपछि खोला बाढी आयो पुरै रातो भएर आयो त्यहाँ चाहिँ अब हामी चाहिँ त्यही लगाएको कपडा र त्यो चप्पल भन्दा बाहेक अरु केही पनि ननिकालिकन अनि भाग्ने क्रम भयो अब हामी त्यो ठाउँमा फर्किने अवस्थै भएन.
Intense rain in just a short amount of time caused a landslide in the high region of Premtham in Sindhupalchok. This blocked the rivers upstream. They then burst, causing a flood downstream, which destroyed settlements, markets, roads, bridges, and claimed many lives. Disasters like these have forced residents to abandon their homes and traditional communities and move to places deemed safer. According to the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority, 20 people went missing and 5 were killed in Sindhupalchok in June's flooding and landslides. Those missing have yet to be accounted for. This disaster has also altered the river's water levels, causing it to overflow at various places. But extreme weather is not the only thing that communities here have to contend with. Sindhupalchok district, where Melamchi and Helambu are located, was hit badly by the 2015 earthquake. Since then, the landmass of the hills has been weakened.
Well, Sindhupalchok is a hilly district, hilly district of Nepal, which has different kinds of hazards: high slopes, steep glacial lakes, rainfall. What we saw in 2021, it was a combination of these different hazards: extreme rainfall, landscape shaken by earthquake, snow dynamics changed, a past landslide which has deposited huge amount of sediment in sort of an intermittent valley.
Haphazard road building and infrastructure development also plays a role in loosening the already unstable earth and triggering landslides.
Construction of these roads do not take into account the geological specificity, the issue of environment, the question of local hydrological requirements, etc. So what we essentially see is that you build a road in a particular slope without considering these factors. You just excavate. Then of course when you have rainfall, then everything comes down.
Uttam Bhandari owned a trout farm in Helambu, one of the 17 trout farms wiped away by the recent floods. Most of their owners are still missing, and Uttam says it's a miracle that he survived.
अब त्यो बेलुका चाहिँ के भयो भने अब दिउँसो 4 बजेबाट अलिकति पानी चाहिँ धमिलो पानी र अलिकति खोला अलिकति ठुलो चाहिँ आएको हो राति 7:30 बजे चाहिँ अब हामी सबै अब त्यही पोखरीकै छेउछाउ रिसोर्टकै छेउछाउमै रुखको आवाज आयो क्र्याक गरेको आवाज आयो त्यो आवाज सुन्नेबित्तिकै ओहो ल अब त ठीक छैन भन्ने हिसाबले मेरो स्टाफ भाइहरु तल भएकोलाई नि भाग भनेर कराएर त्यहाँ म जब मेरो त्यो हाम्रो सिँढी चढ्दै थिएँ तपाईको हल त एकै शटमा चाहिँ तपाईको झ्यापै ढाल्यो हाम्रो एकजना कुक भाइ चाहिँ भाग्दा झ्यापैकै बाढीले चाहिँ उलाई चाहिँ अहिलेसम्म बेपत्तै छ।
A former migrant worker, Uttam put all his life's savings to come back home and start a business. His farm provided employment for many others like him. But now they may all be forced to seek alternative livelihoods away from home.
हाम्रो 7 करोड भन्दा माथि चाहिँ हाम्रो क्षति छ। हामी फेरि विदेश रिटर्न पनि हो युवा। हामी चाहिँ आफ्नै ठाउँमा के गर्नुपर्छ भनेर आएको युवा। अब 81 चाहिँ 1 गतेकोले हामीलाई चाहिँ फेरि यही जमिनमा हामीलाई चाहिँ एकदम अब जिरो लेभलमा चाहिँ ल्याएको अवस्था छ। हाम्रो बिजनेस पूर्ण रूपमा चाहिँ क्षति छ। के पनि छैन अहिले बगर खोलाको बगर भएको छ।
The intensity of Nepal's annual monsoon rains has been growing each year due to climate change. And the risks to the country from these increasingly unpredictable and destructive monsoons are compounded by the lack of effort and resources needed for disaster preparedness. Nepalese officials say hundreds of families have been displaced. Many are living in temporary shelters awaiting relocation. Others, like Ram, have sought refuge in the homes of relatives.
अब अहिले म छोराकोमा आएर बसिरहेको छु। त्यहाँ बस्ने अब भाइहरु सबै त्यो पाखाबारीको गोठमा बसेका छ। सब छाप्रो हाल्दै बस्दै गरेका छ। त्यो त्रिपाल यसो टरा टोरी हालेर बारीको पाटातिर त्यो खोलाको भागलाई छोडेर पाखातिर अब जानी कहाँ बिरानो भइरहेको छ यहाँ। अब कोही चिन्जाने छैन।
In recent years, Nepal has been taking steps to improve its risk assessment and preparedness, but experts believe much more needs to be done, particularly at the grassroots level.
In 2017 we have now an act which is fairly comprehensive about the way disasters should be dealt with. But it's just not the central agency which has to be looking at these questions. The local level governments, becoming more proactive into these areas perhaps could begin to minimize the social costs.
Identifying gaps, building capacity at the local level, and engaging key stakeholders. All these are vital if Nepal's most vulnerable communities are to strengthen their resilience against future climate-related disasters.